This is Golden Coast Exotics. Let's talk about some Dominican Red Mountain Boas. Okay everybody, welcome to the channel. We are going to talk about Dominican Red Mountain Boas. This is a species that I work with here, have for several years, and we get a lot of questions about these at shows when we go to shows. There's a lot of people, even people that are pretty familiar with the hobby and kind of snake people that have still never seen one. They don't know anything about them, asking me what the heck is that in your hand. So they're sort of not really well known at this moment. There's not a whole lot of information out there about them. So I figured it's a good enough subject for us to talk about in our first YouTube video. We'll see how it goes. So I want to go through mostly how we get our babies established. That's something that we get a lot of questions about with people that have purchased from us. They want to see how we keep them and stuff like that. So I figure that's a good thing to go through. We'll go through how we get them started from just babies and raise them up through the years. So we'll get going on that, but I want to talk about the species in general real quick before we get that far. First off, they are from the island of Hispaniola, which, as most of you know, is divided in half, or kind of in half, between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. In the mountains of the central part of that country, that's where the red phase comes from. There are Haitian boas and Dominican boas on that island. There's several different color morphs or phases that you could say. People have called them different things, chocolates and pastels, and other names for different geographic locations where some are going to be red like this. For example, this would be a Dominican red, and then there's the pastel phase also, which is not nearly as red but has a little bit more defined saddles in it, and they're really actually pretty cool looking, but I do not personally work with them. So I work with reds only, and my goal is to make the reddest one that we can, obviously. Now, the species in general is very mellow and easygoing. I can compare them to Amazon tree boas or green tree boas, carpet pythons. A lot of those semi-arboreal and arboreal species are going to be pretty nippy just by nature. Obviously, there's always exceptions to the rule, but Dominican boas, I have found, seldom ever bite. I've never actually been bitten by one, and produced almost 80 of the things here just in the last couple of years. So a lot of experience with them, and from what I've seen, they have great personalities. They're curious, cruise around a lot when handled, and seldom ever bite and seldom ever get nervous. As babies, if they do get startled, they will musk on you, but that seems to be their go-to defense, not biting. So once they get past the musking phase, you handle them regularly, regularly, they will quit that musking and be very, very easy to handle. So they are semi-arboreal, meaning they're going to spend about half their time in a branch or a tree perched on something. They're not going to be able to perch on a branch like, say, a green tree python or anything like that, but they will spend a fair amount of time up on something elevated in the cage. We've got a cluster of branches or something like that. I'll go through some of the things that we use in our enclosures here. They like to spend a lot of time cruising around up there, and they like to spend a fair amount of time on the ground in a hide or soaking in a water dish, and we can go through that as we're looking into our cages and stuff. The one challenge that I've found with this species is that in nature they are definitely lizard eaters as babies. As they grow and mature, I'm sure they start feeding on rodents in their natural environment, but as babies they are definitely lizard eaters, and some will be challenging to get turned over. Others will turn over right away. So that's kind of how I've developed my strategy, how I rear the young ones and get them turned over and then slowly move them up into bigger cages. So they are capable of some pretty large litters. Last year we had a litter of 46, so that was a lot of baby lizard eater hungry mouths to feed and to deal with. So that is their really only challenge as a species. In general, they're awesome. And that is really the only challenge that I found with them. Other than that, temperature requirements are pretty basic. Low 80s, maybe a warm spot of 85 to 87, especially for a gravid female. That's the ones that I really see soaking up the heat. Other than that, I would say between 75 and 85 degrees, you're in good shape. Their humidity requirements aren't great. They do like a little bit of humidity, certainly going through a shed phase and whatnot. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at our caging. But they don't need a ton of humidity and they don't need a ton of heat. And for the most part, I found them to be super hardy and easy to raise and all around great snakes. So let's have a quick look here at our, this is our baby rack here. I do keep them in fairly small cages as babies. They seem to be overwhelmed with anything bigger. I know that sounds weird when you're talking about an animal that's born into wide open nature, but it just is what it is. They feel more comfortable and confident in an enclosed area with some hides. They don't really want to be out exposed. And when you're talking about, you know, in nature, we had a litter of 46 here this year. So you have to figure that out of 46 born in nature, only 2 of those have to survive to replace their parents. Obviously, the island of Hispaniola is not run over by Dominican Red Mountain Boas or Dominican boas or snakes in general. So there's a lot of animals that are going to die in the wild. You know, almost 100% really. If you're looking at a litter that large, very few of these animals have to actually live. So obviously you want a higher a lower mortality rate than that when we're dealing with snakes in captivity. So anyway, let's get on to where we keep our babies. I'm just going to throw Ruby here up on my shoulder, and we're going to pull out one of these smaller racks to get started. See where we find this one right now. Come over, Ruby. Okay, so we just have our hatchling vision rack tub, and this is how we're keeping our babies to get started. Once we have them established and feeding on pinkies regularly, we'll move them up a little bit. But this is basic, super easy to clean, spot check, and the animal feels fairly confident in here. At this point, this animal here is still feeding on lizards. Sometimes you just have to feed them a couple of knolls, get their digestive tract going, and then you can transfer right over to scented pinkies, and then from there on to pinkies. I have tried putting pinkies in there first thing, and it ends up kind of being a waste of a pinky mouse most of the time. I've had very, very few over the years that will take to rodents right away. Some will switch over right away, but in general, I tend to just get them all in here. I need to get them all separated. I have a feeding card for every single one. That way I know which animal has actually switched over. That way I can tell a potential buyer or whatever, hey, this guy ate a couple brown and nulls, and then right from there he was on to scented, and right from there he was on to regular pinkies, and he's been feeding on pinkies for the last 2 months or whatever. That's super important. So if you guys are out there looking for this animal, looking to purchase one, make sure that you are with a reputable person that's telling you the truth as to what that animal is eating, because it can be a challenge to get them turned over. So that is very important, and it's important. That's why I have them all separated out here so we know who's doing what here. So we just have a small water dish in here, big enough for the animal to soak completely in. I use a variety of different things for hides, but it seems like toilet paper rolls or paper towel rolls work just fine. They'll sometimes be back in there. If they get dirty, throw them away, get a new one. And then I like some sphagnum moss back here on the warm side of the cage. This is going to create some ample humidity for the entire enclosure, and I'll usually soak this moss with just a spray bottle every couple days, and it keeps a little bit of humidity going on in the enclosure itself. And if this animal is going through a shed, oftentimes they'll be sitting back on there. Sometimes I find them perched on a branch, sometimes they're down there in their hide in the water bowl or whatever. So these little babies are usually really easy to handle. So I'll talk real quickly about the colors on the babies. This is probably your average looking neonate here. The red does not really start to develop until they're about a year of age, but you'll see that some of these babies have this nice light rusty red to them already. That's a really good sign. It's hard to tell what they're going to look like as adults from the baby standpoint, but there are some that really stand out, and she is going to try to knock some stuff around. Anyway, so some babies will really stand out from the get-go, and other ones take some time to develop. Most importantly is your lineage. The lineage is super important if you're looking at possibly picking up one of these guys. Know where your getting it from. What do the adults look like? What do the parents look like? And that's going to really have a huge defining factor as to what your baby turns out as. As I said, there's a ton of variation from different localities throughout the island. So if you're looking for a red, you want to make sure that your parents that are in the group that produced your baby came from very nice looking reds like her here. And these guys will change throughout the day based on time of the day, temperature, humidity. Their color changes quite a bit just throughout the day, especially as babies. Some you'll open up the cage and be like, oh my gosh, that thing is bright red already and it's warm and it's fired up. And then other times you might open the cage and be like, yeah, he's looking a little not awesome right now. But their color really changes throughout the day based on a variety of factors. Okay, so on to the next step. Once they become established in these smaller cages, we'll move them up to 12 quart tubs. So this is our typical setup here on the 12 quart tub front. Just a water dish, a hide, a little bit bigger hide in this one. Same idea with the paper towels, paper towel roll or toilet paper roll, anything can work. And then I have this sphagnum moss again on the one side to add some humidity to that cage. And you can get a good look at this baby. This particular baby is probably the nicest one I've seen, definitely the nicest one I've ever produced. Really showing a lot of red already, and it has those real nice little black definition lines on each saddle. Really cool. So I do spray this moss every couple days, soak it down really good. The snakes themselves are not fans of being sprayed at all. I used the thin stream on the spray gun and just soak the moss itself. If you start spraying the snake, they'll freak out typically. And then these here I got at a nursery. They're for holding potted plants. They work great. Oftentimes I see the babies up perched on something like that. Other times they're back in the hide or possibly soaking in the water dish. But they're probably good in this size enclosure for at least a year. These are not rapid growth snakes by any stretch. They grow pretty slow, and just as far as getting them established, that oftentimes will take some time as well. So I think a year probably in these 12 quart tubs. At that time, if I'm planning to hold back that particular animal, we would move it up to a vision cage like this, and then on to something like this, and then on to something like this once they were fully mature. But you want to get a little bit of footage in there, please? Lots of branches, a couple hides, big water dish, and that's how we would keep most of our adults right there. And as far as size goes, they really don't get all that big. The biggest female that I have is about 7.5 feet, and I don't think she's going to get any bigger than that. A male would be slightly bigger than this. At least my biggest male is about 4.5, maybe 5 feet at the most, and the female probably outweighs him 2 to 1. A lot girthier, a lot bigger animal for only a couple more feet in length. But they are not oversized, and certainly not something that's going to outgrow you like a retic or a Burmese or even some of the red-tailed boas can get very, very large. But this is probably your average size adult male right here. But this is a female. Okay, so that's going to about wrap it up here, but I wanted to say that this is not a tutorial. This is not me telling you how to do it or the only way that it can be done. This is just, I'm just showing you guys how I have done it here over the past several years, been pretty successful at it. So this is one way to get them from baby to adult and really get them to flourish in human care. So if you guys have ideas, someone's seen something different, someone has a foolproof way of getting these guys to feed on rodents right away, I would love to hear it. And on that front, I've heard a lot of different things. I've heard anything from scenting with cat food, with fish, boiling the pinkies, wrap pinkies only. I've heard all of those things, and I have tried all those things. As of this point right now, what I find to be the most consistent is starting them on the anoles or house geckos. They'll eat house geckos as well if those are easier to come by for you. And once they have a couple of those, start transitioning over to scenting. But if anybody out there has any other bright ideas, I'd love to hear them. So thank you guys for watching, and feel free to reach out or comment. Thank you.